The federal courts are on fire while it snows in the White House, and just how bad has California gotten? I examine in this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Welcome back to the Mayoral Podcast, everybody. I'm your host, Matt Mayer. Before I get into today's content, make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe, and share with friends and family if you like the content you see here today. Also, remember that the time codes are in the description below, so if there's something specific that you want to see me talk about, please make sure that you go ahead, look at those time codes, and then jump to that part of the video. So, over the last few weeks, the Supreme Court and some of the federal courts have been on fire, at least on fire in terms of helping out conservative causes. So just want to go over a few of those with the audience today. The first one that kind of came out was the decision from the state of North Carolina, the lawmakers, to approve the redistricting maps. Now, this is considered by some conservatives as a loss. It really just depends on how you kind of interpret the law. This actually went the other way in favor of the liberals who didn't want the Congress there to have the ultimate say that the Supreme Court, the state Supreme Court that is, has a say in it. It went 6-3 in favor of the liberal cause in this one. The decision 6-3 opinion from Chief Justice John Roberts. The court's majority opinion found that the Constitution's election clause does not vest exclusive and independent authority in state legislatures to set the rules regarding federal elections. So, again, it just really depends on how you kind of interpret that. As you can see, it was a 6-3 opinion, which means there were the three liberals were on the side of the state Supreme Court in the state of North Carolina, which is a liberal majority there. And then there were three conservative justices that were on the court that sided with them in this particular case. I don't think ultimately this is a huge ruling one way or the other. It does set some precedent moving forward, but this is something that ultimately could backfire in some of the cases that favor conservatives. Now, the problem with some of this is that ultimately you see gerrymandering happen all over the map, and this is essentially saying that there is some type of check and balance. So I actually somewhat agree with this ruling here, saying that it shouldn't just be the state legislature that if they have a majority of liberals or conservatives, they get to gerrymander the maps, and there's really no check on that. So to me, I take that as a good thing that they actually ruled that way. So I kind of disagree with some of the conservative justices there. I'm not a law professor. I didn't study law, so maybe there's some nuance there that I'm missing. But just generally speaking, I think it's not a bad decision. So in the next case, you had Counterman versus Colorado. This is a First Amendment case. The decision from June 27th, the 7-2 decision, the court's majority said that the state must prove in true threat cases that the defendant had some subjective understanding of his statements threatening nature. But the First Amendment requires no more demanding a showing than recklessness. And I think that this is a pretty good ruling. This particular case was a message sent on Facebook. A lot of things kind of get lost in translation when it comes to messaging. I'm not saying I don't know the details of this case. It may have actually been a threatening message, but there are some things that people might not perceive as threatening that somebody else might perceive as threatening. So if you're going to prove that this person needs to be convicted in this case of stalking, or it was a violation of the stalking laws of that state, that there was actually some type of malice intended, that this person was conscious of the threats that he or she was making. So I think it's a good ruling there. Another good one for the First Amendment. The other one, Groff versus DeJoy. This one is a religious freedom, surprisingly unanimous decision. In the majority opinion, Samuel Alito wrote that Title VII requires an employer that denies a religious accommodation to show that the burden of granting an accommodation would result in substantial increased costs in relation to the conduct of its particular business. The court left the context-specific application of the clarified standard in this case to the lower courts to decide. So again, another good ruling there for religious freedoms, a unanimous decision. So obviously the liberals and conservatives got together on that one and felt that there was a a clear precedent in the Constitution. And as you can see from a lot of these rulings, they're in a lot of cases not unanimous. Like this one here, the affirmative action case. This one is the Students for Fair Admissions versus the University of North Carolina. This one is going to be a landmark case, that's for sure. There's obviously affirmative action has been something that has been in place in this country for a number of years. And I went over it in greater detail in my last podcast. If you want to see my comments on that, go ahead and check that one out. But I'll briefly say this. Anything that favors one group is going to automatically discriminate against another group. Whether that was the intent of the rule or not is really irrelevant. That is the result of the rule. So that's what this case was. It was split along party lines, 6-3 majority. So this reads, a divided Supreme Court ruled that the use of affirmative action in admission programs at two universities was unconstitutional. In the majority decision, Chief Justice John Roberts said the admission programs could not be reconciled with the, quote, guarantees of the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor said the decision, quote, rolls back decades of precedent and momentous progress. It holds that race can no longer be used in a limited way in college admissions to achieve such critical benefits. Again, for years, people were favored, one group of people was favored over other groups of people, and it really just led to a lot of division amongst the population of this country saying, you know, we disagree with the way that affirmative action is kind of implemented. And really the most, especially when it comes to school admissions, the race that's most affected are Asian people. They tend to overperform, so their bar is actually raised, whereas other races' bar is lowered. So again, you're favoring one group or a number of groups at the expense of another group to try to equal the number of admissions or have it more representative of the population. So a good ruling there that's probably going to have a cascading effect throughout a lot of different industries. People are, I'm sure something else is going to be brought up when it comes to affirmative action in hiring processes across the country. So this is probably not the end of it. And as long as the court stays the way that it is, I assume that they're probably going to end up ruling the same way. But again, my personal feeling is that if it's something that's a state institution, something that's federally funded or state funded with taxpayer dollars, there should not be any type of discrimination. However, if a company, an independent company, decides that they want to have a certain quota of racial minorities or whatever it might be, it should be at their discretion. They should be allowed to do that. So it'll be interesting to see if there is something like that comes from this ruling. When it comes to universities, especially state universities that get a lot of state and federal taxpayer dollars, those, in my opinion, should not have any type of discrimination type of practices. And whether you're on the side that says, well, this is actually helping this group, but it's also hurting another group by helping the other group. So I agree with the decision. Bottom line, if they were to come out and say that against a privately owned company, I would feel differently about it. So it seems like all these same-sex cases end up in the state of Colorado. There was that landmark decision with the baker. That was, I believe, in 2015, 2016, something like that. But 303 Creative LLC versus Ellis. In a 6-3 decision from Neil Gorsuch, the court held that the First Amendment prohibits Colorado from forcing a web designer to create expressive design speaking messages with which the designer disagrees. I definitely agree with that particular ruling. There should not be any type of discrimination laws in regards to what people can and can't do. Now, this protects religious freedoms. Again, in my last episode, I went over it in greater detail. I think that this needs to apply across everything. If anyone has any reason why they do not want to service somebody, they should be allowed to not provide people with that service. That's just the way that it needs to operate. You're putting somebody's religious views over somebody else's personal views. and it's worth protecting the religious views, but it's also worth protecting everyone else's views. Now, if somebody wasn't religious, presumably this ruling would say they have to actually, against the anti-discrimination laws, which does not supersede the Bill of Rights that protects religious freedoms. So somebody then would be forced to provide a product or service to somebody that they don't want to provide a product or service to. Now, I disagree with this person denying them, but I don't hold those religious views. So to me, I personally wouldn't do it, but they should be allowed to do so. And everyone should, if they're an individual, a private business that's not receiving government funds, should be allowed to discriminate for whatever reasons they want, whether you agree with them or not. So that's my stance on that particular topic. I think there's probably a lot of people that don't necessarily agree with me, but I don't really care. That's my opinion, and people are probably not going to like it, but hey, I'm almost 40 years old. I'm not going to change the way I think now. And then the last one, this one's probably the most disturbing in terms of the way that this one broke down. It was 6-3 along party lines, which, again, you see that a lot. But the student loan forgiveness program is what this one is about. Biden tried to unilaterally just forgive student loans, which he doesn't have the constitutional authority to do, and even Nancy Pelosi herself said so. Yet the justices, the liberal justices, ruled in favor of Biden. And to me, that's the scariest thing about this particular ruling, is that the liberal justices went right along party lines, even though many members of Congress say that if we're going to forgive, even if they're for that, they're for the student loan forgiveness, it has to be an act of Congress. The president does not have that authority. So the decision reads, in a 6-3 decision from Chief Justice John Roberts, the Nebraska case, the court said the Secretary of Education lacked the authority under the HEROES Act to rewrite that statute to the extent of canceling $430 billion of student loan principal. The other challenge was dismissed for lack of standing. Completely insane to me that this was even a split decision. It should not have been 6-3, it should have been 9-0. The Department of Education, the Biden administration, they do not have the authority. It has to come from Congress, even if you're in favor of it. So it's really kind of disturbing that that's the way that the rulings broke down. So meanwhile, on July 4th, there was another ruling against the Biden administration, and that has since been paused by a higher court. But the Biden administration, in this particular case, should scare a lot of people. Forget about your political beliefs. If you think that somebody should be shut down for saying something you disagree with, and the Biden administration or the federal government is going to step in and shut down that speech, that is a dangerous precedent. Right now, you might agree with Biden or the Biden administration trying to shut down disinformation, whatever they're calling it, misinformation, which there is obviously a distinction between the two, but it's, they use them kind of interchangeably, even though that they shouldn't be used that way. But the court pauses the order limiting the Biden administration contact with social media companies. So from this article, you'll see that there are some serious questions as to what the Biden administration is trying to do. And I'm gonna play a video from the reaction of CNN with regards to this, and then I'm gonna play another video with the reaction from a lot of conservatives. Probably know Dan Bongino. He's great. If you don't know Dan, you should probably go and check out his content. He's got great content. And he kind of goes over it in pretty great detail and really hits the nail on the head. So I'm going to play both of those videos for you guys here in just a second, but I'm going to go over kind of what this article is talking about. So from the article, the Biden administration lawyers have asked the Fifth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in New Orleans to stay the preliminary injunction issued on July 4th by U.S. District Judge Terry Doty. Doty himself had rejected the request to put his order on hold pending appeal. Filed last year, the lawsuit claimed that the administration in effect censored free speech by discussing possible regulatory actions the government could take while pressuring companies to remove what it deemed disinformation or misinformation. COVID-19 vaccines legal issues involving President Joe Biden's son Hunter and election fraud allegations were among the topics spotlighted in the lawsuit. His injunction blocked the Department of Health and Human Services, the FBI, and multiple other government agencies and the administration officials from, quote, encouraging, pressuring, or inducing in any manner the removal, deletion, suppression, or reduction of content containing protected free speech. So, again, what I'm going to play here now is a video from CNN and their reaction to the injunction that the court put against the Biden administration. And then I will play you, I'll come back and I'll discuss what they talked about. And then I will play you the clip of Dan Bongino showing exactly what these people are doing in attempts to suppress free speech. So here's the CNN reaction video.
This judge was confirmed 98-0 by the Senate. Just reading the words in this injunction, a, quote, massive effort by the defendants to suppress speech based on content. Those are the judge's words, calling the present case, quote, arguably involves the most massive attack against free speech in the United States history, Ellie.
Yeah. It's a dramatic decision by this judge. If you read through it, he's citing to literature and George Washington and Ben Franklin. Here's what really is astonishing to me. This is a conservative ideology that clearly comes through in this decision. It's a conservative political ideology, right? We saw some of the quotes questioning vaccines, questioning masks, conservative talking points. But the ruling itself is the opposite of judicial conservatism. This is one of the most aggressive, far-reaching rulings you'll ever see. What this judge is purporting to do is to micromanage, really, the day-to-day interactions between essentially the entire executive branch, all these agencies that are listed as defendants, and the leading social media companies. And in the actual temporary injunction, the judge basically says, you're not allowed, administration, to talk to these social media companies about any protected free speech except for cybersecurity threats, national security threats, criminal threats. But where's the line? Who's going to police this?
So in that video, you see the CNN analyst talking about what is in the court's decision to separate the Biden administration from basically putting their input and pressuring these social media companies to silence anything that they disagree with or deem mis or disinformation. And I don't think that this guy actually realizes he's making the point for us. He's asking who makes these decisions. Well, that's exactly what they're trying to say. There should be no ambiguity when it comes to protected free speech. If it's something like, in this case, he was talking about cybersecurity threats, something that's a matter of national security, sure, that's going to be something that any administration would say, hey, we need to make sure that we're not being infiltrated by foreign actors. Okay, fair enough. Anything that has to do with actual national security is perfectly fine. Now, somebody saying that the vaccine is not all it was cracked up to be is not something that is a matter of national security. It's a virus. It has to do with the virus that we can't control. They clearly couldn't control it. Anyone who says it's a matter of national security is missing the point entirely of what happened or what we went through for the last 3 years with these lockdowns. You couldn't control the virus. The vaccine couldn't stop the virus. So if you're saying that this is a matter of national security and everything that is being said negatively about it can potentially be deemed as something that is a threat to our security, we couldn't stop it no matter what. There's no way you can stop these viruses without a legitimate vaccine. That was not a legitimate vaccine. It went through a couple of months of trials. There was no way it was going to be anywhere near as effective as they made it out to be. So this guy is essentially making the point for us. Again, he's talking about, like, where's the line going to be drawn? Well, that's where the line has to be drawn. And saying somebody trying to censor people that are saying things about Hunter Biden that are actually true, like, that doesn't disturb you at all. If you're a liberal out there, think if this was Trump doing it to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whoever, and he's trying to suppress negative stories about Donald Trump Jr., you'd be losing your mind, and you should be, because the president and his administration should not be suppressing these stories. And even if they're 100% legitimate, there's some truth to them, there's no truth to them at all, suppressing the stories is only going to be like pushing a beach ball underwater. Eventually, it's going to come to the top and it's going to have more exposure than it ever did before. So, that said, there's even more to this when it comes to having some type of detail of what they were doing and pressuring these companies. That's where the clip that I mentioned earlier of Dan Bongino comes in. So here's the clip of Bongino breaking down what it is that these companies were actually having to face when it came to the federal government and the Biden administration.
This isn't the Twitter files. This is that lawsuit the Missouri Attorney General filed against government censorship with Facebook. Did you see the gems coming out of this? This is with the Twitter files. The lawsuit's been kind of subordinated for a week or so. You should be watching this thing. The Missouri Attorney General filed this lawsuit. In the discovery phase, they got all the emails from government between the government and these social media companies. And some of the gems coming out are unbelievable, even by our own standards. Now, the suggestion anymore. Here's the left's talking point on the Biden administration and candidly other people in government, even some in the Trump administration. I don't think Trump knew about it, but people in the Trump administration who were swampies, we're still doing this. It's not just here. The suggestion by the left with the Twitter files expose, guys, I want you to understand what their response is going to be. Is, when we told them, Twitter and Facebook, it'd be a good idea if you did this, it was all voluntary. Folks, garbage. The government cannot wink and nod and say, it'd be a real shame if your place burned down if you don't censor this person. But even if you were to accept that ridiculous narrative that it was voluntary, it wasn't. That's already been documented in court case after court case. The government can't even imply this kind of stuff. It's assumed pressure. You understand? Throw that argument out too. Here's Rob Flaherty, Biden's the White House digital director. That's his job, to monitor social media. Here, emailing people at Facebook. Hey, since we've been on the phone, the top post about vaccination today is Tucker Carlson saying they don't work. And yesterday it was Tomi Lahren saying she won't take one. This is exactly why I want to know what reduction actually looks like. Now you're into, look, Rob Flaherty, director of digital strategy, the White House, from his official government email address. Now your argument, even that it was implied, is out the window. You look like a fool. Here's the White House digital director directly calling for someone, Tomi Lahren and Tucker Carlson, to be censored by reduction of distribution of their content. Your entire argument falls apart. The Wall Street Journal covered this. The White House censorship machine. Here, it gets even worse. Apparently, Flaherty emailed a Facebook executive saying, quote, "You're hiding the ball," linking to a Washington Post article about Facebook spreading about vaccine hesitancy, as the paper put it. Flaherty said, "I think there's a misunderstanding." The executive wrote back, "I don't think this is a misunderstanding." Flaherty replied, "We are gravely concerned your service is one of the top drivers of vaccine hesitancy, period. We want to know what you're trying. We want to know how we can help. And we want to know that you're not playing a shell game. That'd be a lot easier if you just be straight with us." Folks, this is straight up intimidation this is like so true. There you go. Guy wins the award for the day. Joe, it's been Joe 99. Guy gets it today, Joe. I'm sorry. Usually he'll come in with a motley and take it. Guy's like, this is just straight up mafia talk. Hey, it'd be a real shame. This doesn't work out for you guys. It'd be a real shame if Facebook, we burned down all of Silicon Valley, but you suckers in it too. This is mafia. This is, what are you gonna, I don't know. Donnie knows. This is Donnie Brasco when he was pretending to be a mob guy. This is how he learned to talk. Forget about it. He should have just said, forget about it at the end. This is bananas.
So Dan in that clip kind of breaks it down, shows what it is specifically that the Biden administration did to try to suppress the speech of, in this case, Tomi Lahren and Tucker Carlson with regards to the vaccine and promoting vaccine hesitancy, as they put it. Now, again, not being a matter of national security, that can't be something that they step in and try to say, we are protecting people by not letting them hear this information. And again, the line needs to be drawn somewhere in terms of what is actually protected and what the government has a right to say. But somebody giving their opinion about how well the vaccine works, and a lot of the times when people are giving this information about the vaccine, they're citing statistics, and people just interpret those statistics a different way. You might say, 1% chance is too great of a risk for me, where I might say 1% doesn't matter to me at all. But presenting it to the public as the gravest threat of all time or no threat at all is irresponsible. Saying, hey, this is what the number is. It's a 1% chance of death, or whatever the number was. It was actually ended up being much lower than that, unless you were in a different age group, a higher age group. But give the people the information and let them make that decision for themselves. And suppressing that information is not something that the government should be, but they were doing in this case. Meanwhile, there was a party at the White House, and cocaine showed up, and the media doesn't really seem to care what happened. Now, we were told that the adults were back in the room. I don't remember hearing anything about illegal drugs being on the grounds of the White House at any other administration. But this one, not only did it show up, but they essentially just swept it under the rug. So from NBC, why the Secret Service closed its investigation of cocaine found at the White House without conducting interviews. I mean, this is pretty insane. The agency, along with the FBI, tested the packet to determine it was cocaine and looked for any fingerprints or DNA evidence. But the tests yield no usable forensic evidence. Video footage of the area where the baggie was found also provided no evidence to narrow the possible suspects beyond the list of roughly 500 staff members and visitors who passed through during the weekend earlier this month. So they apparently just decided that they weren't going to look into this any further, and that was going to be it. They were just going to say, well, there's cocaine found, no big deal, we don't really care. Like, Dan Bongino has another clip that, if you guys want to go check it out, check out his video. I'm not gonna play it here, but he basically breaks it down as his time in the Secret Service, saying there's only a certain number of people that could potentially actually have that. Everyone else has to go through the proper security measures, and cocaine would never get through. So there's probably not anywhere near the 500 people that they're making it out to be. There's probably somewhere around, maybe a couple of dozen that they could ask, and they're just choosing not to do so. Continuing on with this article, the small amount of cocaine, 208 milligrams, or about 0.007 ounces, would only result in a misdemeanor charge in the District of Columbia, and the agency determined that it did not warrant the expenditure of resources it would take to interview 500 people. Wow, the federal government finally actually cares about taxpayer dollars and wasting their money on certain investigations, only when it involves the Biden White House having illegal drugs all over the place. So yeah, congratulations there. You're finally actually worried about the taxpayer dollars. And again, that 500 number is probably no more than just a few dozen. Continuing on with the article, the incident drew much public attention in recent days, including criticism from Republicans who accused the Biden administration of not doing enough to find the culprit. And that's exactly what's happening. They don't want to find the culprit because they know it's not going to be, if they find the culprit, it's not going to be somebody that they want to expose. So meanwhile, in the culture war, one of the wokest companies out there, Ben & Jerry's, and they've been extremely woke for an extremely long period of time, posted a very anti-American tweet on July 4th, and it just automatically came back to backfire on them. And of course, they're not going to respond to the actual people that they stole the land from, the stolen land that their corporate headquarters are on. So from Newsweek, Indigenous chief wants to take back Ben & Jerry's headquarters built on, quote, stolen land. Of course, an indigenous tribe descendant from the Native American nation that originally controlled the land in Vermont that Ben & Jerry's headquarters is located on would be interested in taking it back, its chief had said, after the company publicly called for stolen land to be returned. Of course, you knew it was going to backfire, and they're not going to do anything. They're not going to give them anything. They're going to make some empty gesture at most to reconcile their losses from however many years ago, however hundreds of years ago. But it's just, it's insane to think that these people really believe that land should just be given back to somebody that it was taken from hundreds of years ago. Now, that was a much more primitive time, even 100 years ago, 2, 3, 4, 5, 600 years ago. But that's essentially human history up until about the 18th, 19th century, where we actually started, in a lot of cases, putting property rights into law and recognizing lands and titles and deeds and things of that nature. But you can go back from this tribe, and they probably took it from the tribe before them and the tribe before them. Like, where do you stop? Was it the last person or the last group of people that the land was taken from? No, because then the next tribe is going to make a claim that said, hey, we had this from, X time to Y time, and they took it from us, so now they need to give it back to us. And ultimately, it's not going to lead to anything, but it makes the crazies, throw their hands up and agree with the nonsense that's being spewed out there. It's just ridiculous. So finishing up with the article, it comes after the ice cream company was questioned as when it would give up its Burlington, Vermont headquarters, which sits on a vast swath of U.S. territory that was under the auspice of the Abenaki people. I don't know if I'm saying that right, before colonization. This is the quote. This is directly from their Twitter feed. It's just a quote here, but it says, "The U.S. was founded on stolen indigenous land," the company said in a statement ahead of Independence Day. "This year, let's commit to returning it." And of course, it was going to backfire. I couldn't be more happy that it backfired against them. If there's a company that deserves it more than Ben & Jerry's, there really isn't very many out there. So congratulations, Ben & Jerry's. You stepped in it, and you're going to do nothing about it, as all these other woke companies tend to do absolutely nothing about their claims to help the people that were marginalized, but they only want you to help the people that were marginalized with things that you have, not with things that they have. So, I mean, obviously it was going to be hypocritical, and clearly it was. So this is something that I'm going to go over this very briefly. I don't know how, you wonder why people don't believe in institutions anymore. They don't have trust in media and the press, is because stories like this. So from MSNBC, and it's an opinion piece, but still, you're supposed to be a news outlet. Why would you even run something like this unless you're trying to push an agenda, which is just absolutely false? Pandemic fitness trends have gotten extreme. Literally, white supremacists' latest scheme to valorize violence and hypermasculinity has gone digital. So why would you make this an actual story? This is not an actual thing. And on top of it, it's basically saying anyone who participates in these type of activities and fitness, just kind of broadly speaking, is a right-wing thing. And they're running this as if this is actually news. The only little piece I'm going to cover here, because this is how ridiculous it is, it's essentially comparing most of today's modern MMA fighters, which tend to be very conservative, to Adolf Hitler. Of course, everything is Hitler. Everything is Hitler. They really cheapen the actual tragedy of the Holocaust by comparing anything and everything to Hitler. So from this piece, oh God, physical fitness has always been a center to far right. In Mein Kampf, Hitler fixated on boxing and jiu-jitsu, believing they could help him create an army of millions whose aggressive spirit and impeccably trained bodies, combined with fanatical love of the fatherland, would do more for the German nation than any mediocre tactical weapons training. I mean, guys, I don't know what to say about this. Again, everything's racist. Everyone's Hitler. Where does it end? I just don't know. I don't know where you go from here. What you can really say. You can't argue with these people if they think that physical fitness is a far right-wing ideology and needs to be eradicated. They just want everyone to be fat and lazy and living off the government and not question anything the government does. One party, that's it. So, meanwhile, California has gotten absolutely out of control. How ridiculous is California? I heard this story about a week ago, and I couldn't believe that it was actually true. And I did some research, and it is 100% true. It's not only Breitbart, which is a right-wing news source, but there's other outlets out there, including the Los Angeles Times, that are talking exactly about this case. The headline from here: California man convicted of killing 2 women released same day. A California man who was convicted of killing a mother and daughter Tuesday was released from custody the same day after a jury convicted him of involuntary manslaughter rather than murder, and was given credit for time served. Unlike many cases of lenient justice, this is not a result of prosecutorial discretion or a George Soros-backed district attorney, but rather state laws giving discretion to juries in capital cases and defining voluntary intoxication as a defense to murder. So in this case, this guy, the defense claimed that he was so drunk that he didn't know what was going on. So therefore, it's voluntary. This guy wasn't force-fed liquor or shot up with something that made him go out of his mind against his will. This guy did this himself, and California law allows that to be a defense case. So this guy served less than 4 years for brutally stabbing a mother and daughter and walked out on the day of his conviction for time already served. You wonder how bad it's getting? Like, that's a breeding ground. I'm going to go over a little bit more of what's going on in California, and it's getting worse, and it's going to get even worse at an exponential rate. Now, I'll kind of go over that in a minute, but from the article, Sean Sherrick, 29, was quickly identified as the prime suspect and arrested hours after deputies found the bodies of Margaret Dahl, 59, and her mother, Phyllis Potter, 82, who had both been stabbed to death on August 24th, 2019. Again, the murder occurred in August of 2019. This article's from a few weeks ago, and the man has already been released. Less than 4 years this man has served. Sherrick, and again, I don't know if I'm saying his name right, Sherrick's state of mind quickly became the central issue during the trial, as defense attorneys argued that he drank so much before the killings that he was unconscious when the crimes occurred. According to the state penal code, quote, if somebody dies as a result of the actions of a person who was unconscious due to voluntary intoxication, then the killing is involuntary manslaughter. This is just what the left is about. Your personal decisions, you are not held responsible. It's not your fault that you got so drunk and blacked out and stabbed 2 people. That's not your fault. Like, you're not responsible for your decisions. So therefore, it's involuntary manslaughter, and we're going to give you 4 years in prison for brutally murdering 2 people. Unbelievable. This is really unbelievable, this story. Oh, God. Continuing on, finishing up here. Once the jury convicted Sherrick, he was sentenced to over 6 years in prison, but he had already spent 4 years in custody and had earned additional days credit for spending part of that time in county jail. The judge allowed him to walk out of the courtroom having received credit for time served. This is a real story. This actually happened. Double homicide, less than 4 years. Convicted. They're not even arguing. The defense wasn't even arguing that he didn't do it. They were just saying he got so drunk that he didn't know what he was doing. So let him out. This is saying that he should have served over 6 years, but they give him whatever. They give him credit for time spent in county. This guy should be locked away for life, and he's going to be roaming the streets. He's already roaming the streets. It's unbelievable. Another story out of California. This one from San Francisco. New York Post from... when is this from? This is from July 4th. New York Post from July 4th. Headline, masked teens mugging moms, nannies in crime-ridden San Francisco, reports. San Francisco mothers, including pregnant women and nannies, have been targeted in violent, broad daylight robberies at the hands of masked minors in the crime-ridden city. Police have connected a group of teenagers to at least 11 such attacks in the last week in No Valley and nearby areas, according to the San Francisco Chronicle. So the article goes on and just talks a little bit more about it, but this is where it starts. This is where you start seeing minor crimes turn into major crimes, turn into extreme crimes like rape and murder, things of that nature. When you don't prosecute the little stuff, these criminals feel emboldened and go on to do even worse things. These, who knows? They're underage. San Francisco may have just let them walk. That's how much of a cesspool that city has become. And LA has gotten so bad that 50 Cent, the rapper, says that they are finished based on their no cash bail policy. Now, this is a guy who got shot 9 times in New York back in, I think it was like 2000, something like that. And he's recognizing that this is a bad idea. He came from a rough neighborhood. I believe he came from a pretty rough neighborhood. And he's saying that it's the city is gone. So from this out of this UK Daily Mail, 50 Cent tears into LA for resurrecting its zero bail policy, and he says the city is, quote, finished, and warns, watch how bad it gets. So from the article, the hip-hop rapper 48 wrote on social media, LA is finished, watch how bad it gets out there, shake my head. The overall crime rate has jumped 11% from 2022 compared to 2021. That's a big jump in 1 year. That's a big jump, especially for a place like Los Angeles. There's a lot of people there. There have been reported 60 crimes per 1,000 residents, up from 54 crimes per 1,000 residents in 2021. So this graph here just shows crime in Los Angeles, and this is what I was talking about. When you don't punish the smaller level crimes, these criminals realize that they can get away with that, and then they start committing even worse, more heinous crimes. So if you see this graph here, the crime from January 1st of this year through July 1st of this year, so the first 6 months, look at the amount of robbery and assaults. It's extremely disproportionate, which you would probably assume that there's going to be more of those than homicides. But when these things don't get prosecuted, these people are eventually going to be emboldened to do even worse things, the rapes and the homicides, things like that, the shootings there at the bottom. A lot of these people were probably people that were committing smaller level crimes. That's how things start. Nobody starts off just right out the gate with homicides. It all starts with little things, and once they get away with those, they start pushing the envelope. And this is what you're seeing in places like Los Angeles, obviously the article earlier from San Francisco, the state of California. If you're voluntarily drunk and murder people, you're going to spend 4 years in prison. It's absolute insanity. Absolute insanity. So finishing up with the article here. In the Rancho Park neighborhood, there was a 114% increase in violent crimes between 2019 and 2022, according to data. The Los Angeles police have blamed the rise in mental illness and increasing drug use and homelessness that have overrun the city. This is a result of poor policies. They say that they care about homeless and they care about mental illness and drug problems, and yet they encourage these behaviors and don't do anything to actually get the people the help that they need and the help that they deserve. Finishing up here. But it's not only the unhoused population who's victim of crimes. Councilwoman Tracy Park told the USA Today, everyday people out in neighborhoods or community, people working in local businesses have been victimized, whether by assaults or armed robberies. It's pretty commonplace. This is the sign of the elected officials, just kind of throwing their hands up and saying, it is what it is. This is how it's going to be. And there's really nothing that we can do about it. And until something changes in the politics, something changes in the way that they enforce the law there, this is going to continue to happen. And it's unfortunate because California is arguably the most beautiful state in the nation. It's obviously our largest state in terms of population, third largest in terms of geography, second largest in the contiguous United States. It's a place that people want to be, but the policies are driving people away from the state of California. That's it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Again, if you like the content you see here today, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, share with friends and family. And again, the time codes are going to be in the description below. So it's unlikely you started at the end, but if you did, go ahead, check out those time codes. Or if you want to go back and see something that I talked about, the time codes will be in the description below. Thanks, everyone. This is it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.